that situation?
Basically reviewing things that they should have been reviewing all along, which is beneficiary arrangements on life insurance policies, wills as a matter of fact as well, making sure they're still appropriate. Now, if you're remarried and you haven't been paying attention, you might actually find that on your old 401k, your ex-wife is the beneficiary, and you don't want your family to find that out when you pass away, because that has happened. And that makes ex-wife very happy, and it makes current wife and family very unhappy. So you don't want them cursing you while you're in the grave. So review the beneficiary arrangements and do it early and often, okay? Another thing about retirement, and this is more behavioral finance or just like quality of life in retirement, is that there's an 85-year-old Harvard study that's still ongoing, and they talk to people about what makes them happy. Okay, and the vast majority of people mention that what makes them happy is the social connections they have through work primarily. Now think about it. If you work in a company, you have coworkers. If you're a doctor and you have patients, if you work in a hospital, you also have coworkers. Those are all social interactions, whether you like them or not. Some you like better than others, but there's stimulus to your brain. And if people just go cold turkey retire, suddenly all those connections, or most of them, end. Now, people find that suddenly in retirement they might get depressed because they don't have the social connections, and they begin to feel isolated. Now, if you're in retirement and you said, okay, I'm going to retire, I'm going to play golf for a few years, and suddenly you're missing the interaction, you can always fill that in. Work with your church, work with your synagogue, work with a charity. Okay, another good thing. The other thing is like Jimmy Carter, right? Jimmy Carter's closing in on 100 if he hasn't crossed the line already. He's been working for Habitat for Humanity since I think right after he was president, and he just kept going. And I think that kept him young and youthful. So that's something you want to consider. Now, anecdotally, my wife and I adopt dogs primarily, so we saw a dog at the Westport Town Animal Shelter, and we went there to see him, and it was a weekend, and there were 3 older guys that worked there. One was the youngest one was like mid-70s, the oldest was like in their 80s. And they're there on the weekend, and I got to talking to one of them, and they said, how did you end up working at the animal shelter? And he said, I retired, I was a human resources director at a local company, and I retired, I played golf for 3 years, but how much golf can you play? So I was getting tired of that, and my neighbor was a police chief in town. He said, hey, Bill, you like animals, right? There's an opening at the town shelter. So he said, I'll check it out. So he went down there, and he found that he liked it because he loved animals, number one, but there were always new people coming in and out the door looking to adopt pets. He made a lot of connections, and he was like, what, I just decided I want to do this, and I'm going to do this for as long as I can. And the other 2 people that worked there felt the same way. They love what they were doing, and if you love what you're doing, retirement's a meaningless concept. You're going to do it as long as you physically can do it. So that's another good way to replace those social connections, and it's very valuable to do, and recognize that they may happen if you just like cold turkey stop working inside. Well, I've got enough money now, what am I going to do? Try to direct that, before you get in that situation.
So make sure your policies are updated with their beneficiaries. Find something meaningful to do, win a Nobel Prize perhaps.
That would be good.
Yeah.
That would be a nice surprise.
Kevin, someone's taking the plunge, they're in retirement. On the estate planning side, what are you thinking about? What's top of mind?
Yeah, so this is usually right around when I like to bring up the concept of multi-generational planning. And it really is kind of as simple as it sounds. It's just the idea that your estate plan is going to impact your children's estate plan, is going to impact your grandchildren's estate plan, and then that's not even considering if they have spouses and those families are doing estate planning. So it's just looking at it a little bit more holistically. And typically this is around the time when you start to have that level of information. You are getting into retirement, so you may have adult children, you may even have grandchildren already. Children probably have established themselves in their career a little bit and have started to show their differences. They've got different lives, different trajectories, different incomes, all of that sort of stuff. So we can take all of that in and start to consider it and really customize your plan now. We got something started, we got the foundation, and now we really want to build it for you and your unique family. And a good example, Jessica brought up some of the interesting ideas around transitioning from income to living off your savings and pulling from different buckets and all of that. So one example, while you were working and you had your income stream, you may have been helping your kids out, pay bills, or if they needed a little extra here and there, you felt pretty easy about it. The money was coming in, you could pull it. But now the same question may be, all right, they want a down payment on a house, but where is that going to come from? So again, with this multi-generational planning concept, we can really sit down and say, well, maybe it shouldn't come from a bucket at all. Maybe intra-family loans is the way to go, because we can structure that. Now you've got an income stream. Your child can still accomplish their goal of getting the down payment and getting the new house. So it's just a way to really help the whole family start to understand everyone's needs, concerns, and really, again, start to customize that plan just for you and your family.
Thank you. Okay, so now, later in retirement, what are you thinking about? What are some of the things that are top of mind with clients who are in that situation? I'll start with you, Eric.
It's an excellent question. Later in life, did I mention review beneficiaries? Things change. People that you had as like power of attorney, maybe they've passed away. Maybe it's time to direct your kids as having power of attorney rather than your spouse, or at least have them as contingent. So you always want to be mindful of that. I also like to say if you have a love-hate relationship with your children, you can always make them the executor and not tell them where everything is. So they're going to have to look around to settle your estate to figure out how to tie things up. Not a great way to do things. So as you're later in life, you want to get organized if you haven't been. Let them know where they can find important papers. Let them know where all the assets are. Perhaps get them involved in a lot of the planning that we do. Saying, I'd like to bring my son, daughter in, whatever, so they understand what my financial situation is and how it might play out. Now, when my parents passed away, they wanted me to be the executor not because I was the oldest, I was actually the youngest, but I was in the business. So when they passed away, I handled their assets. I knew where all the assets were. I did a fairly good accounting of that. But my father always had this briefcase that when I visited them, he would make a particular point to say, all the important papers are in this briefcase. Now, the briefcase tended to travel around the house. So one month it was like in this closet, and another month it was in this like seat bench thing that had a compartment underneath. So, but all the important stuff was in the briefcase. So flash forward to when my father passed away, then my mom passed away. And when I went to probate the estate, the attorney said, by the way, do you have a notarized copy of the will? And I'm like, you didn't keep a copy of that? And they're like, no, your parents didn't trust me to keep a copy of it. So I'm like, oh no, I'm doomed. And then I thought back to the briefcase. So I went to the briefcase, opened it up, and there in the back, there it was. So, my dad was thinking a lot clearer than I was. And he made sure he drilled it into my head that, hey, all the good stuff, it's in the briefcase. So, if you want a legacy where your kids go, my parents made things really easy for us kids because they were so organized, they were so deliberate, and, settling estate sometimes can cause some real rifts in families. Don't let that happen to your family, okay? Just get proactive about it later in life if you haven't done so already.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing that personal story, and Kevin as well earlier. So Jessica, later in retirement, any smart tax planning tips that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So later in retirement, likely you have your required minimum distributions and you're withdrawing from your IRA. So a strategy that I'm sure many of you already use is the qualified charitable distributions, where you can withdraw from your IRA and gift that directly to charitable organizations. And what's great about this is it helps satisfy your RMD. So it's perfect because it satisfies that RMD, and also the amount that you're contributing to those charities are not included in your taxable income. And this is very significant because it's saving you in taxes, but it can also save you and allow you to be able to be eligible for other deductions. So I think about the medical deduction, that the amount that you're able to deduct on your itemized return is above a certain percentage of your adjusted gross income. So by doing QCDs, you are lowering that adjusted gross income, which then means the amount that you're able to deduct for medical expenses is greater. And there are several instances where there's certain deductions or credits that's based off that adjusted gross income. I also think about Medicare Part B. The premiums that you have to pay is tied to your modified adjusted gross income. So we want to make sure that we're keeping that low for several reasons. I also think a very important deduction that I always look for when I'm reviewing a client's tax return is what exactly are the medical deductions that they're taking. So if I'm talking to a client throughout the year and they're telling me about improvements that they're making to their home to make it more accessible for them, I expect to see that on your return. Many people don't think about this because usually when you're making improvements to your home, you're like, hey, this is just going towards my tax basis, right? But in fact, if that improvement is to make your home more accessible to you, let's say you're adding a lift to your home or you're updating your shower to make it more accessible, that's a medical deduction. So it's things like that that I'm looking out for.
Yeah, those are great things to look out for. And many people can't even deduct their charitable contributions, so that's another way that the QCD can help.
Yeah, and that's a great point, especially being that the standard deduction is higher. Especially when you're a senior, you get that higher deduction. So utilizing QCDs, make sure that you're actually able to benefit from that.
Yeah, great advice. Last but not least, Kevin.
I'll maybe steal a little bit from Eric, who may be right that if you select a child to be executor or trustee, what we would call just generally a fiduciary to administer your estate, it could be a punishment, and that may be true. But really, I think once you're later on into retirement, again, kind of playing off the theme from earlier from me, you've got all the information about your family. You're working with everything. You know the family dynamic. You know who's gonna be able to work well with each other, or who really has the acumen to be something like a fiduciary and discharge, particularly if you've got a plan that may last for many years. You're setting up trusts for the benefit of perhaps even several generations. So one thing that we really like to talk through is whether the family member does make the most sense. It certainly may be the most cost effective, although that could be debatable, because you could imagine how quickly it can get expensive if there's even just something like an investment mistake, or certainly if there's some sort of tax mistake, or there becomes contentious litigation, the dollars can add up very quickly. So we would walk through the idea of like a professional fiduciary, which could be an individual still, but one of the solutions that we really work with are trust companies that allow us to continue as an investment advisor as well. So we really can bring that continued continuity to your plan. You can have your advisor continue on for generations. Probably not the same advisor for generations, although at least 40 years, hopefully. But it continues that continuity with your plan. We're your trusted advisors. We know how you built it. We know what your goals were for it, and so we can really continue to work with the trustee moving forward to help discharge those duties and make sure your plan is carried out to the fullest extent. So that's a really great option. Again, it's a little bit of a cost benefit, but we think this conversation is very salient later in life, because again, you're kind of understanding all those family dynamics, knowing kind of what your goals are and what you need to accomplish.
Great. Well, great insights from everyone. We now want to turn it over to the audience, all of you, see if you have any questions for our panelists here.
If you have any questions, Fei will be around to grab them from the index card. Just put your hand up. In the interest of getting us started, the first question I have here is for Kevin. And the question is, are there any tipping points or other reasons to switch to an estate plan, from an estate plan to last will or revocable trust?
Yeah, maybe the river. So a lot of people, going back to my foundational element, a lot of people are going to start with the last will. That's sort of typically the default estate plan. A lot of people ask us about trust planning. It's a huge buzzword out there for sure. It could be as simple as just avoiding probate. That's always kind of the companion buzz concept. But for me, it's usually, there's going to be some sort of reason that your estate's going to carry on. So do you want to create something where many generations may benefit from a trust? Or there's just some sort of unique circumstance that is other than just outright distributions to your family. To me, that's usually the main tipping point to start thinking about trust planning and really what we would call lifetime trust planning. Get it set up now, kind of keep it out of the courts where things can get contentious, just have it set up and ready to go from day one.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. Next, I'm going to go over to you, Eric. And the question is, what is some advice on long-term care for someone in their 80s?
I think that ship has sailed, but you should be cognizant of the fact that you should plan for needing long-term care. Now, at that point, there's no insurance solution to it. It's going to be your own assets. Maybe try to designate someone you would like in the family member to act as kind of a caregiver intermediary. Traditionally, I know my wife's Italian. That's how her family's kind of settled it, is that between her and her brother, they help take care of her mom, who's in her early 90s and has started some cognitive decline. But you're not solving that in your 80s with any insurance solution. But you do want to have that conversation with your family, because you can get into situations where you do need care, and especially if you do have cognitive decline, you want to make sure that some families, they have a dysfunctional family. One of the younger, members of the family takes advantage of the situation. There's a lot of elder abuse that happens, and it's not pleasant. But if you're cognizant of it, you can at least make plans to make sure that whoever has financial power of attorney and healthcare power of attorney, they're the right people for the role. And that's probably the one thing you really can do, up until you pass away. And you should always review those arrangements, because the right person for the job may change. People pass away, but let's say you just have your spouse as your healthcare proxy, and she passes away and you don't update it. And I guarantee you, if you go into the hospital and you're in your 80s and you're incapacitated, if a family member comes in and says, my mother or father, whatever, does not want to be here, the first thing they're going to ask you for is the advanced medical directive. And I know that because my mother had a heart attack after my father passed away. And she told me specifically she did not want to die in a hospital since she was hard of hearing. So I got the call from the continuing care place where she was staying. And they said, Mom had a heart attack. She's at Cape Cod Hospital. So I drove up there, and my mom, I get up to the floor, my mom's screaming, "Get me out of here." Okay? And the first thing they asked me for literally was, do you have an advanced medical directive? And I'm like, here. We're going to get my mom out of here, back to her unit. We're going to get 24/7 nursing care because she didn't want to be in here. And they're like, well, she's agitated. And I'm like, yeah, she's agitated because she doesn't want to be here. She wants to die in her unit. She's passing away. So I was able to get her out of there in 24 hours, and she died peacefully a couple days later. But, if we hadn't thought that through, I would have been sitting there going, oh man, this is not good. And I don't want to, you don't want any of your kids to carry that around. So, just plan for it. If you can't plan for it with insurance, plan for it situationally. Which one of your kids or which person you trust will be able to handle that situation.
Thanks, Eric. Last question over to you, Jessica, is what are some of the most common missed tax planning opportunities that you see with clients?
Yeah, absolutely. I think some of the most common missed opportunities sometimes actually goes in the state return. So some states do not follow federal. And it's important to think that what you're doing on your federal return may not be the most appropriate for your state return. So I mentioned that currently the standard deduction is higher, right? It's kind of the highest we've seen. So many people are not itemizing on their federal return. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't then itemize on your state return, because there's certain deductions that you can take on your state return that you cannot take on your federal return. So certain things like certain miscellaneous deductions. So I think often we spend a lot of time on our federal return because that's kind of the bigger number that we're used to seeing, but there can be very significant saving. So for example, deducting some of your advisory fees paid out of your taxable accounts. For New York, you can take that on your New York itemized return. So whenever I'm reviewing clients' return, I don't just look at the federal return, I look at their states as well.
Thanks, Jessica. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Andrew, to bring us into the next portion of the segment.
Yes, I wanted to thank everyone and thank you three for great insights. These are resources available to all clients along with your primary advisors. There's no additional fees. We as always, we do not sell any insurance when it comes to the planning that Eric is also helping with. So you can get an objective view as well as you have come to know us as offering. So hopefully we can be even greater partners to you going forward with additional resources, as well as, of course, helping you with your investment portfolio. So on that note, I wanted to thank Eric, Jessica, and Kevin for great insights. And now we're going to get to the next segment.
All right, why don't we begin? Can you all hear me? Can you hear me now? I know what to do. Okay, so I wanted to just give you a few background remarks as a prelude to the, the investment end of things. Let me start before I do that, just to say I want to thank everybody for coming here. It's really gratifying to see all these people, and 40 years is like gulp. Andrew over there was just a few years old at that time. So now that I got that out of the way, let me tell you more substantive stuff. Right now we're saying that there's about a 50-50 chance in our economy of a recession. You can say, well, that's like